Congressman Turner, excuse me. It's been my pleasure to work with you as we've and work closely together as we deal with this very important issue. You know, the focus is really on reducing the incidence of sexual assault in the armed forces and providing victims of this crime with greater rights and protections. And I think, like Congressman Turner, we were both drawn to this issue by the stories we heard. I know as a newly elected member of Congress, I had begun, and serving on the Armed Services Committee, I had begun to read the stories and the statistics, but it was in a meeting with wounded warriors several months after I first came here. I walked into a room of those who had admirably served our country and noticed that there were but a few women and they were over along the wall. So I went over to talk with them to see what their experiences had been in their service. And because I had recently read an article about the issue of sexual assault in the military, I asked, sort of not really knowing what the answer would be, what their experiences would be. And one was a woman who had multiple deployments. She had served as a nurse, and she said that in reality she'd never been assaulted, but she lived with the constant fear of it. She said she was actually more afraid of our own soldiers than she was of the enemy. That story truly brought it home with me and have reinforced the statistics that we hear, as have the stories of other victims who have been coming forward so bravely and making the rounds on the Hill to tell us their stories. Very important. We hear too, and this has also been the case in meeting with those who serve veterans in the VA in Massachusetts, but also the statistics tell us that 1 in 3 women leaving military service report that they've experienced some form of military sexual trauma, and by the Pentagon's own estimate, as few as 13.5% of sexual assaults are reported. And among those victims who do report an assault, fewer than 8% will ever be able to confront their assailant in court. So the STRONG Act, which we are introducing today, would provide victims with new rights. As you've heard Congressman Turner say, ensure that victims have access to a military lawyer and maintain their option, and in so doing still be allowed to maintain their option of confidential reporting, even if they seek legal counsel. It would ensure that conversations between victims and victim advocates, as well as DoD safe helpline counselors, are confidential and immune from discovery by military lawyers if a case goes to court. You can imagine the chilling effect it must have on victims to know that as they want to seek the help they may so desperately need, that those conversations can actually be used against them should this proceed to a court process. In addition to supporting victims, better training is required throughout the services in order to prevent these crimes from occurring with such frequency. So this bill would also standardize the training of service members, commanders. We understand the very critical role commanders play as this process works its way, and often are not very well trained to deal with it. Victim advocates and sexual assault response coordinators, all better trained and in a consistent way across the services. These recommendations, many of them were actually in the Defense Department's own task force that was commissioned to examine the issue of sexual assault in the military. We have to give the Pentagon credit for making strides. I know that on the Military Personnel Subcommittee, we have them come to us and talk about the serious efforts that they're making, but there are obviously additional steps that must be taken, and this bill seeks to address some of the shortcomings to better protect the victims so that they achieve and have access to a legal process that eventually holds perpetrators accountable, and that the services themselves are better able to deal with this very difficult and troubling issue. So with that, I'd like to introduce Anu Bhagwati, head of SWAN, Director of SWAN.